We have guardrails for our company. They're not negotiable. It's quality, it's transparency, it's how we operate. And that is beyond question. We can't change that. And our whole team knows that. The second you start jeopardizing those guardrails for lines on an income statement, the company loses its focus. It loses its mission. And if you have a good mission, we are of the very strict belief that a good mission will be rewarded.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technologies in the food and supplements industries, brought to you by Trustwell, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams, VP of Marketing at Trustwell. If you're loving the conversation, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned to the end of the episode where you'll hear our guests tell us their key food industry predictions for 2025. All right, let's jump right in. On today's episode of Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, we're delighted to welcome Jeff Smith, co-founder of Colorado Craft Beef. With a multi-generational ranching legacy and a deep commitment to transparency, sustainability, and innovation, Jeff brings the gap between traditional beef production and modern food systems. His insights span technology adoption, farm-to-fork visibility, and building trust in an industry that values relationships as much as results. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. So I know that you came from this multi-generational ranching legacy. What lessons really helped you kind of shape where you are today, looking back on your history?
The first thing I have to clarify is I made a really good business move. I married the rancher's daughter. So my wife is actually the fifth generation rancher. I did grow up in and around agriculture. I originally grew up in Oregon, not totally different country than where we're at in eastern Colorado, very high desert. Where I grew up, there was a lot of cattle. There was a lot more logging. So the mountains made a much more different biodiverse area. But, the thing that I have seen throughout my career, not just in Oregon, but I did some international work. I worked in a lot of different agricultural spaces. And then, of course, meeting my wife and her family, the commitment to the legacy is fantastic. It's one of those things that made me really care for the family, made me really care for the opportunity, but also makes you realize it's bigger than you. You're always a part of something larger, whether it's an industry or a ranch or a legacy. And that type of commitment to the industry or that type of commitment to the type of product we sell to our customers or other ranches sell to their customers is something that I think is not common in a lot of industries. We're not manufacturing widgets. There's a lot more to it than that. But it's something that I think a lot of people in the industry take a lot of pride in while also catching a lot of heat. And that's one of the things we really like to do is engage with the public to share the concept of that legacy and what it means for us and even our other brothers and sisters in ranching.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking through that as well, when you think about where you started with Colorado Craft Beef and kind of how your vision has evolved with the company as you've grown, talk to me a little bit about how you've maintained that foundation and then, also evolved the company.
So a lot of people in business have an idea of what they want a company to be and they go try to execute that idea. Luckily, we were in a position that we knew a good product to make and we let the market share with us what it needed. So we knew how to make good beef. And as we've grown the company, we've tried to listen to the market. We've tried to follow, air quotes, the trends. But what I could really share with any entrepreneur, agriculture or otherwise, we have guardrails for our company. They're not negotiable. It's quality, it's transparency, it's how we operate. And that is beyond question. We can't change that. And our whole team knows that. My wife and I know that. And down to even some of our business partners, like the clothing I'm wearing right now comes from one of our business partners. And listening to some of their guardrails is fantastic. And the second you start jeopardizing those guardrails for lines on an income statement, the company loses its focus. It loses its mission. And if you have a good mission, we are of the very strict belief that a good mission will be rewarded.
I agree with that entirely. And, something that I've noticed about what you guys are doing is you're taking that foundation, but then you're also incorporating technology. So talk to me a little bit about how you ensure that as you incorporate technology and as you digitize, how is that moving along your growth and maintaining your mission?
I have a really fun story about that, actually. So one of the technology pieces that we use on the live cattle side is we actually pull a genetic panel on every animal that's coming into our beef program, gets a genetic marker test done. And most people in the cattle industry, myself included, I was in a lot of different judging contests growing up. We could walk through a pen of cattle and we could pick, this is where they are, this is where they should be. This is how we sort them to be shipped into market or different times. And the first time my wife pulled genetic data on about 100 animals and we sorted them, the look on her father's face was that of disbelief because he looks at her, and my wife is an absolute maniac when it comes to cows. She has a master's degree in cow nutrition. And she said, no, Dad, the data says this is the sort. And it was the most uneven, non-industry level sort I'd ever seen. Her dad didn't say that, but the look on his face echoed that. And when that group of cattle was finished, when they were ready for market, they were all absolutely even, and they did not start that way. And that is a level of technology that is new to the industry in a lot of ways, cost prohibitive to a lot of folks because you're talking about $20 an animal to get that test, aside from the labor to do that. But seeing the benefit of that was incredible, especially something that could be done at scale. That is the hardest thing in agriculture or in business. Oh, we're going to utilize this tool. Well, how long in the story arc of your company is that tool going to be beneficial? How soon are you going to outgrow it? Or if you 3x the size of the company, can you even use that tool anymore? Or did you outgrow the efficacy of that technology? And that is probably the thing we look at the most because, our company, we sell on e-commerce, we are in retail, we sell through Amazon. The number of digital tools, especially with the advent of AI, you could bankrupt any company you wanted paying for AI marketing. But it's being back to that guardrail conversation. What are we doing? How are we doing it? And when Kara came to me with the genetic testing model, she said, hey, I really want to try this. Okay, let's check it out. Will it scale? And it is something we can scale. And that was a big conversation around it was, hey, this data could be helpful. It will give us better decision-making ability, but is it scalable? And luckily it was all of those things, but really seeing the benefit, to one of our core beliefs, that allows those particular cattle to meet their genetic potential in the least disadvantageous way possible in a moderate amount of time where we're not trying to push cattle like the commercial industry or hold cattle back for a marketing window. It becomes an animal health, animal husbandry conversation, which is something we stand for. And so that becomes the flip side to the tech and economics conversation. What are your marketing guidelines? What's your company ethos? Does this help or hurt that? But also, in our business in particular, those cattle depend on us. We depend on those cattle. It is our obligation to optimize their ability for a good life so they can then nourish us. And all of those things play into it. And I'm sure it's the same if you're in farming or you're in forestry or you're in tech, because you're people, right? We're going to get this new technology. What's that going to do to our humans, our human capital in the company? And it's just that holistic vision instead of what I like to talk to people about is playing whack-a-mole with solutions. We have 100 solutions, but we didn't maybe identify the problem. And that's one thing a lot of people get hung up on.
Introducing Ask Reg by Trustwell, your AI-powered regulatory assistant from food safety to nutritional labeling. Get fast, accurate answers backed by verified sources across the US, Canada, EU, and more. Just $299 per year and get 25% off with code podcast25. To claim your discount, visit the link in the show notes. Yeah, and that is such a great example. Can you share an example where you maybe had thought this technology would be a good fit, and then it ended up not being something you guys went forward with?
I can't think of any tech we've implemented and then had to roll back because we do move very slow in that aspect, unless it's, we need a different shipping platform. Something we did out of sheer naivete was when we started the company, we were with WooCommerce. And we didn't build the website correctly. The group we had building the initial website built it in a way that you couldn't bolt things onto it. And we've probably reinvested another $50,000 on different website technology because we didn't build it correctly out of the gate. And that was just because we didn't know what we didn't know. We're now with Shopify. That switch took time. That was done almost 2 years ago now. But it's some of those, some of our partners like to call tuition payments that are just part of business. But I can't think of any that were a air quotes failure, something for the listeners. I try to talk to my girls about this. We have 2 girls that are 4 and 5. And the concept of failure to me is simple. It is only a failure if it's a thing that happened that you failed to learn from. If you didn't learn from it, now it's a failure. Otherwise, it's a lesson and we can move on. And I think that keeps your head in a positive space because we're all going to mess up a lot. And technology is really good at pointing out what you did incorrectly. But most of it is implementation. I don't think we've chosen a wrong tool yet. I think we have implemented some tools mildly incorrectly that we have to go fix later. But I do believe that's also just the genesis of growing a company.
Yeah. And I think this industry, it can be slow to adopt digital tools at times, kind of relying on legacy systems for the food supply chain. How do you see us as an industry kind of overcoming that resistance and really focusing in on using technology to, move things forward?
The good news is with the pandemic and the shutdowns during COVID, are you familiar with Dr. Temple Grandin from Colorado State University? So Temple is a great woman. We've met with her quite a few different times. But she wrote an article during the pandemic that said COVID just exposed the efficiency and the fragility of our food systems. And I could be misquoting by a word or two, but that was the general concept. And then she wrote a book about it. And I was talking to her and I told her, I said, hey, I really love that article. And she's like, you're going to really love the book. I was like, yes, ma'am, I will have to track the book down. But the interesting thing about that is if you are in agriculture like we are, there are a lot of people that have cattle that hobby farm and I'm not saying that with any judgment, but their livelihood is not dependent upon ag. Sometimes they have jobs in town. Sometimes it's a tax shelter. I'm guilty of that too. It just is what it is. But the number of investments that's happening in the ag and food tech space right now is insane because of the holes in the industry provided and kind of exposed through the pandemic. I think some of that is going to just go bananas. Like Mark Cuban, the billionaire, he now owns a 3PL company that has shipping solutions out of Dallas. The number of 3PL solutions that have popped up are huge. The number of companies that are trying to aggregate UPS and FedEx space so that more people can get to the market easier is huge. And all the way down to what I would call the more commercial ranching industry. Prior to COVID, if you and I, Lydia, owned a truckload of cattle, we couldn't sell them to a big packer. The market wouldn't allow for it. There was not a mechanism for that. You had to know a guy that had a contract that was forward contracted. You couldn't get into that marketplace, which eliminated price discovery. It eliminated competition. It aggregated different solutions. And it was fine for the industry because at the end of the day, we have to be harvesting cattle. That's just what has to happen. And the system worked. But there are companies that have put together online auction houses where we can now sell a semi-load of cattle to the big guys. That didn't exist 5 years ago. So some of the tech folks that are bringing their knowledge to the space are creating a different way to think. And fortunately, they have enough capital behind them that they can actually move the needle. On average, it's around 600,000 cows a week. And that is the fed beef supply chain. That is high quality beef. That's not cull cows. It's a crazy number to think about. It gets even more crazy when you operationalize that number and you say, when we haul cattle to a large packing facility, there's about 35 cows on a semi. Well, now how many semi loads is that a week? That is just insane numbers. And so when you try to change that system, there's so much momentum, so many systems already in place of how it operates that you just can't. And luckily, a lot of the tech money, a lot of the entrepreneurial side have really started to chase that. So I don't know where it's going to change. I just know it's changing quickly. And then if you compare that to, what we do in the direct-to-consumer beef chain, the demand for our product is getting bigger every day. Like better for you beef sticks is kind of the market play. So if you think about our beef sticks or other beef sticks, they're, lower sodium, not a whole bunch of filler, or ours in particular, all beef. We don't have pork, which if you put pork in your beef sticks, it drives down the cost, which a lot of the big brands do. That marketplace, the better for you beef stick market, was up 54% in 2023. That's massive market growth when what's interesting is the total beef stick market went down by 3% in that same time period. So the consumer has more voice than they've ever had. And that consuming public has a lot of dollars behind it. And for all the people that hate the fact that I talk about money, I have to apologize. I'm a money nerd. My degree is in business, finance, and accounting. But at the end of the day, Lydia, anything I buy, I'm supporting a market. Anything you buy, you're supporting a market. Every dollar everybody that listens to this show spends is a vote for a certain value chain. And I don't believe the public has known that any better than they do right now in the history of humankind. And that is moving the needle bigger than anything.
I mean, the consumer demand right now, and taking that alongside what we're seeing, the movement in regulatory of removing dyes, banned additives, all these things, consumers are getting very educated on that. And so how have you seen that really affect your business, like in the last, I'd say, year?
I would say the last year, we haven't seen a lot. I think it's just kind of been a steady burn since we started the company. And we founded the company in 17 and started shipping nationally in 18. I don't know that I've seen a big swing either direction. We are in the tallow space, so that one's really wild to watch because that one is just like a roller coaster. But generally speaking, the consumers, they have a lot more data. I think in a lot of cases, they claim to be much more educated, but when we have to consider where the data comes from. And I don't want to call anybody out specifically, but there's a lot of people with a lot of platforms that talk a lot of things that may be true in their region, but they're not true nationally. Actually, here's a great example. Joe Rogan. Everybody knows Joe. Joe has Will Harris from White Oak Pastures on his podcast. I think he's had him on 3 times now. And I've personally sent Will emails thanking him for his stance on agriculture and what he shares, because what he shares is very helpful. And I've sent Joe messages thanking him for that as well. And I'm not saying this with any negativity towards either of those gentlemen. They're both, I would consider, friends of the industry at least. I can't do what Will does. Will gets 66 inches of rain a year in Bluffton, Georgia. I get 11. By sheer mathematics, I can't do the same things Will does. And this is, I could be misquoting these numbers, but one of the things he mentioned was, I believe he said he had 3,200 acres and he ran 3,300 mother cows, I believe. I could be off on the math. Well, for us to have 3,200 acres here, we would run 700 roughly. So we have a 20% decrease in our ability to put animals on the same amount of ground because of the forage, the rain, the climate, the fact that we have winter. They're in southern Georgia. I know it gets colder, but they don't have blizzards. So I think that's the hard part, is everybody hears somebody speak. And while that person is saying their truth, it's not truth for the whole industry. So somebody says, well, you have to do it like this. I physically can't do it. Like I can't do what Will does. So I think that is the main disconnect we see. And we don't say that with any animosity. That's just business. It's just science. And that's where we love the terminology we use. You'll never hear us say we're going to educate the consumer, because I think that comes from a place of ego. I'm going to go tell you what you don't know. Well, hold on. Probably not going to get you the warmest of receptions, but we love to engage. Because when somebody says, do you grass finish your beef? I say, we can't. All the grass here is brown now. We're going to have snow in 6 weeks. I can't do it. I can't do it at the rate in which the business needs to operate. And being able to share things like this and talk through social media like we do makes it an approachable conversation where people can ask the question. And by and large, the number of interactions we have with the general public is great. And I do want to say that the majority of the time we're not talking about buy our product. We're talking about support the system you want to support. And if you're in Georgia, buy from Will. Will has a great company. And I shouldn't have to ship beef to Georgia. So we do it with a holistic approach. And I think that really helps people to see kind of through the business nonsense. And more importantly, we do spend a lot of time talking to other producers. People call, hey, how do you ship? What can we do here? How can we help through that? And we spend a lot of time coaching other producers. And I think that builds some credibility to have conversations like this.
Yeah, definitely. And when you think about, the data you guys are working with, how are you balancing the needs of, regulatory compliance, consumer demand, and really maintaining that single source of truth for your data?
Well, the question I would have to ask is, which data are you talking about? Because there is a ton of it.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's true, because just thinking about the complexity of the supply chain today and what you're having to take in, just curious kind of how you manage all of that and where you maintain all of that and make sure that everything is on the same page, really.
I think the first thing to share is what our value chain really is. So there's a lot of direct-to-consumer groups out there. We are a little unique in what we do, where the only part of the chain we don't do is we don't have a mother cow herd. So we source calves from other ranches. The rest of the supply chain is under my control. So luckily, the source of truth is pretty easy to find. It may be in a different entity because of company structures, et cetera, but the source of truth is internal. So one of the things we do to manage that source of truth, or really to manage variability, is when we buy calves, we are typically buying from the same groups year in, year out. So we know the starting point of the genetic potential. As we go through, they're on grass here at the ranch for the summer. That's pretty standard stuff. The family's been doing that since 1913. And then we own 2 feed yards where our cattle then go to and our people feed them. Cloud-based systems, day-to-day management. We've got a great manager that runs those facilities for us. And the best part is we're involved in all of them. Actually, as soon as we're done here, I'm loading a bunch of tools in the pickup because I have to go install new internet at the feed yards because the old systems aren't working, and I'm doing some different repeaters to connect things a little better and make the cloud service better. And the last part of the chain, of course, we own our own harvest facility. So when you get a steak from us, it's from us. It didn't go to a third-party facility where we think we got our beef back. It didn't go to a feed yard that we don't know what they got fed. And I'm not saying that as the industry standard. The industry, by and large, is very, very well controlled because of what's demanded. And luckily, working in agriculture, a handshake still means something. And, the coolest part about what we've been able to do as a company is we built a network around us of producers, of partners, of the amount of corn silage we're putting up right now for the feed yards is into the millions of pounds. And there's not a paper contract with any of those producers. It's a handshake. So how we manage the data and how we manage some of the other stuff is by just doing good business every day and owning the supply chain, luckily, which we've been fortunate to build out, which was no small feat.
Yeah. And I think there's, also that human side of technology when we're talking about adoption. How do you guys internally ensure that as you introduce new tools into your working environment, that your people are on board and able to move quickly?
Are you familiar with a gentleman named Jocko?
No.
The Jocko podcast. Jocko is actually one of our investors. Jocko is a retired Navy SEAL. Jocko owns a leadership company called Echelon Front. And Jocko has a book called Extreme Ownership. And we've got, I don't know how many copies of that book we've given to people on the team, people in the network. But if my head of marketing, who's a retired Marine, comes to me and says, hey, I need this tool, I do the typical business diligence. Why? What does it cost? What are we going to gain out of it? And I say, prove it. And they get 90 days to go knock it out. And we understand concept before we go into it. And you have to be ready at day 90 to pull the plug. And it's the problem you get, and Jocko talks about this, and I was not military, just to be clear. They talk about mission creep. We never go past this mountain. We get just right past it next time. Well, next thing you know, you're 10 miles past it. So it's about that same guardrail conversation we started with. And then I can't manage all of it. I actually talked about this on a podcast a couple of years ago. I said, when our oldest was born in the hospital, I remember holding her and I was like, holy cow, life just changed a lot. It's no longer about me and my wife. All of a sudden, I fell to the bottom of the totem pole without even knowing and was happy to do so. Luckily, we've been fortunate enough that our companies did the same thing. It's not about me anymore. It's about the team. And if our head of marketing comes to me and says, I need this system, like we just implemented a system called Triple Whale about 60 days ago. And you have to consider, one, he's asking for something. If I'm going to tell him no, I probably need to have a pretty good reason. I trust the guy. And if he's asking for something, he's built the level of trust to be able to ask. I probably feel a little bit obligated to want to give him a yes. But he also knows that I'm going to say, hey, man, show me how this works. And a level of ownership, back to Jocko's book, Extreme Ownership, that he has on his plate to make sure that system works like he told me it would is incredible. And I don't have to beg him for an answer. The amount of things he's just shared with me, look at what this tool does. Look at why this is helpful. It's unbelievable. But it's also, as a business leader, you've got to multiply your ability to make things happen because I can't do it all. And so having guys like Jay, or my wife is a great business partner, or Mike that runs the harvest facility, when they come to us and say, I need a tool, your first answer should be, how do I make that happen for them? Because they're probably not asking because they're bored. But then you've got to have those understandings in place. Like we just ordered a new machine for the harvest facility that was $60,000. We ordered it yesterday. That's more than I spent on my first house. That is a very big swing. But when I was asked, hey, we want to buy this, the email I got wasn't, hey, we need this. It was, we need this. Here's the benefit. Here's the added weekly value. Here's what happens if we don't get it. How do you argue that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of goes back to the culture that you have built, there in the company as well. I wanted to move on to sustainability because I know that that's an important factor of, what you guys are working towards. So talk to me about how you take that from a buzzword to actually having, measurable impact and how you guys kind of see that within the company.
Well, Lydia, you're one buzzword behind because after sustainability, it's now regenerative. So the buzzword story are currently, if I remember correctly, it's natural, organic, sustainable. Now we're at regenerative. So I think you hit the nail on the head is the buzzword meaningful? Maybe. The way I've talked about sustainability in particular is so many people think it's an idea. Well, I consider sustainability a three-legged stool. It has to be economically sustainable, has to be publicly sustainable. So just from a metric standpoint, like, hey, we're doing this because it's more sustainable. But if you have to tell the story in public, does it go well? And there's a lot of other things to it. But too many people think about sustainability as it makes me feel better. Well, is it sustainable or not? And that's one of the things we've run into. A great example, if anybody wants to Google Will Harris at White Oak Pastures, there's a water video that Rogan has showed a ton of times. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It shows runoff off of his farm next to runoff off of his neighbor's farm, and it is exceptionally different. And Will is an absolute pioneer in the regenerative movement. And to look at that and say he's not regenerating would be crazy. The hard part is, again, back to the water conversation, he has to deal with water runoff as a problem. You have to get water off the field. We're completely opposite. You want all the water to stay. So I think it comes down to people understanding that sustainability or regenerative doesn't mean the same thing even 5 miles apart. A real world example of that for anybody that's like laughing at their phone or whatever device they're listening to right now. From where I'm sitting right now to the far west side of the ranch, which is straight out that window, it's about 7 miles. And last summer, we had a rain event come through. And on the far end of the ranch, it got 5 inches of rain overnight. At my father-in-law's place, which is 2 miles from here, he got 3 inches of rain, and we got less than 1 inch where I'm sitting. Do you think I can still manage the whole ranch the same way? Not at all. We are at Mother Nature's mercy. Now, if you have irrigation, you have other ways to minimize those impacts. Certainly, there's things you can do. But every ranch, every pasture, every county is going to be different. So when we look at sustainability, I had somebody ask me and said, prove to me you're sustainable. And I said, well, the original family homestead's over my right shoulder, and it was founded in 1913. By my math, that's 112 years that it's sustained. And the ground looks the same today as if it did 200 years ago when the buffalo and the Comanche were here. So I think we need to, as a group, understand what sustainability means. And when we talk to consumers, the question we get the most from consumers is, do you use the whole animal? How much of it gets thrown away? That's a great question. That's a really fun question. That's a question people are really sinking their teeth into. They're not searching buzzwords. And I've seen that evolution of consumer thought really start to crop up in the last, to your point a few minutes ago, last 1 year or so. And that's been interesting to see because the same people that will harsh on the very, very large packers, hey, I want to start using the whole animal. I said they do the best job at the least amount of economic impact. And they were like, what? I'm like, if that's the metric we're looking at, like that's why our prices are so much higher. The cattle prices are generally the same, but my cost of beef production is about 4x what the big guys are. And my cost of marketing is significantly bigger because we move less volume, et cetera, et cetera. So it's interesting when people start talking about sustainability, what pieces of the wall they're going to pick to use in their thought process. And that's what we love having conversations like this is like, well, what can we do? Like our 2 feed yards are about 9 miles apart. They have absolutely different climates. One of them sits kind of on a hill. One of them's behind a bog. So it's a little more moist. Like it's super weird. And you don't think about it until you're like, why is this so different? And then you start noticing it and you're there every day.
And I mean, we've talked about several things that you relate to the industry as a whole, but as you look ahead the next 5-10 years, what are the trends that you're seeing really across the supply chain that you think are going to really hit big in the next 5 to 10 years?
I think the economic efficiency of cattle is going to be a big driver. I don't know how many people would know this in your listening group, in your audience, but the price of cattle right now, and for the last 12 to 18 months, it hits new record highs every 30 days. Our cost on a live steer in a box at the end of the day is up almost double in the last 7 years. That's crazy economic impact for somebody of our size. That is going to drive some change that I think is going to be really good. Some of the technology that we talked about on genetics, et cetera, is going to adjust some of that. What I really think, though, is going to happen is consumers are changing their buying patterns. And something to think about that, if you look internationally, of the US compared to many other regions of the world, the amount of disposable income we spend in our country on food is sub 10%. If you look in South Korea or you look somewhere else, South Korea is the highest one I've seen. South Korea is at like 45%. Half your disposable income goes to food because the cost of food in that region is so much higher. I do believe that in our country, liquor consumption is going down. Liquor, beer, wine, whatever spirit you're into. And I believe a lot of that revenue is being redirected towards quality food. And what we've struggled in agriculture with for the last couple of decades is people want sustainable, regenerative, organic, whatever buzzword we want to use, but they didn't want to pay for it. And that is probably the biggest argument we get is your prices are too high. I'm like, I wish I could have them lower. I can't. And there's any number of factors, processing costs, et cetera, that people want that level of quality, that level of ownership, that level of stewardship, but it costs money. And until the last few years, most customers didn't want to pay for that. And I think that is shifting culturally. And I'm really curious to see how that changes the market.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great prediction. And then, really to close us out, I would love to hear from you kind of what is the legacy that, you and the company really want to leave to the industry?
The first thing I want to do, and this was our goal with the company, was to keep the ranch, the family ranch, which by the way, the family ranch is not a part of craft beef. Craft beef is something Kara and I founded and stood up on our own. And it came from a conversation with my father-in-law in his horse barn during a rainstorm right before we moved back from Idaho. And I'm enough of a business nerd that I asked Dave, we were talking succession planning of the ranch. And I said, well, Dave, can we take over where you're at? He said, no. And for a man that's done it that well for 50 years to say no, knowing how much he loves it, he's never lived anywhere else. The guy is an absolute maniac when he does what he's doing, and he's so good at it. And we went through that conversation any number of different ways, and it's banking regulations, it's all the different stuff. But that is where Colorado craft beef came from, was the ranch is a price taker. It doesn't have any leverage to help itself. The market dictates whether or not it's functional, generally speaking. And we didn't want that for ourselves. And, I can't speak for my wife. I think she would agree with me generally. I hope to give our two girls the opportunity to choose to be in the industry. Not saying they have to, not saying they'll want to, but I want to put them in a position that they can choose to be a part of the industry in a viable way. And for the industry as a whole, I really want to show them that the people in town are not your enemies. I actually heard the Denver Chamber of Commerce president talk about a month ago, and he said our cousins in the city is how he referred to them, because there's too much of a divide there. But what I'd really love to point out to the industry is we don't exist without the people in town. The people in town don't exist without us. And as much as we don't understand why people live in a concrete jungle, they don't understand why we're okay playing with manure. And bridging that gap and showing people in the ag industry that our legacy is solid, but sometimes our means and methods of doing things need adjustment, and that's okay, would be a lot of fun.
And Jeff, how can people find out more information about what you guys are doing and follow you guys online?
Yeah, you can find us at Colorado Craft Beef on any social platforms. I do recommend you sign up for our newsletters. And we are doing a lot more longer form content on YouTube where you can watch what happens at the ranch. We've done breakdowns of different types of beef. We've done big cooks that are kind of fun to watch. But just, be a part of the community, whether or not you want to buy. We've got some good recipes out there, and there's always good producers in your region too.
Sounds great. We'll definitely check it out. And so thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of food tech talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. Make sure to subscribe. And if you love the podcast, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about Trustwell and request your free demo of our technology platform that connects food formulation, products, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit us at www.trustwell.com and click Get Started or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Thanks for listening.